Hello and welcome to the project risk management. This is going to be an introductory session. We'll touch on the basics around project risk management and stop specifically around methods and techniques used to manage risks on the project. So let's proceed. So what is a risk? First of all, projects exist in varying degrees of uncertainty. And uncertainty presents risks that projects can explore, assess, and decide how to handle. Risk is a part of an uncertainty performance domain as per project management body of knowledge. And risk management for risks helps identify the risks, help control them proactively. So risk is an aspect of this uncertainty, and it can have both positive and negative risk effect on the project objectives and the project performance itself. And threats are the negative risks and opportunities are the positive risks. Basically, risks with positive outcomes are called opportunities. So we need to make sure that we focus on both sides of uncertainties around the project. So what is project risk management? It's a process in which risks are identified and controlled in a proactive manner. It allows projects and business to improve the chances of success by minimizing threats and maximizing opportunities. But there are benefits in helping to identify the projects that are not performing well, that are heading towards trouble, and apply solutions to fix this. The risk management helps preparing for the unexpected threats in advance. It helps providing enough data to make better decisions regarding project outcomes, project events. It helps in improvement of communication between stakeholders and the project teams, and helps teams to stay more focused on the key project outcomes. So there are several stages in project risk management. They're specifically pertaining to planning, execution, and monitoring and control stages of the project. So in planning, there is a step called plan risk management. This specifically targets the building of risk management plan and preparing activities and preparing decisions that will go throughout the project. The step called identify risks, essentially you identify all the risks as early as possible, and you continue doing so throughout the project. Quantitative analysis of the risks and qualitative analysis of the risks. Both of these help in assessing type of a risk and impact of a risk. And finally, planning the risk responses, essentially building actions for all the identified risks and especially the risks that are yet to be identified, basically preparing for the unknowns. During the execution of the project, all the planned risk responses will be implemented or as needed. It's not necessary that all of them will come into effect. And monitoring and control will require monitoring these risks and especially threats around the project execution. So for the threats, let's talk a little bit about them. Threats have basically, a threat is an event or a condition that, when it occurs, has a negative impact on one or more project objectives. There are several strategies that can be considered for dealing with these threats. First is avoid. Threat avoidance is whenever the project team acts to eliminate the threat or protect the project from its impact. Essentially, trying to prevent this threat from impacting the project before it becomes a problem, before it starts impacting the project. Escalation is appropriate when the project team or project sponsor agrees that threat is outside of the scope of the project, even if it's still impacting the project. And the proposed threat response would exceed the project manager's authority. So essentially requesting assistance from higher authority beyond the project. Transfer involves shifting ownership of the threat to a third party. It's not the same as escalate, as it might still be on the same level of the authority as project management and stakeholders, but responsibility will be on the third party. So this third party will manage the risk and bear the impact if the threat occurs. Threat mitigation basically is a way to reduce the probability of occurrence and impact of a threat, and early mitigation action is often much more effective than trying to repair the damage of the threat that has occurred. So it's unlike avoidance, it's an active step towards reducing threat impact. Threat acceptance essentially acknowledges the existence of a threat, but no actions are planned. So basically, the project manager and the project team accepts the fact that this threat exists, and if it happens, no activities will be done. It basically will mean that either this threat is of no big impact towards the project objectives, or there are no resources to deal with it, and project objectives will be reached regardless of this threat. Actively accepting a risk can include developing a contingency plan that would be triggered if this event occurs. But it can also be a passive acceptance, essentially doing nothing. Threat profiling is part of a threat management strategy. So you can do analysis of any specific threat by building a threat register over time. And there are three properties that you can analyze for the threats in terms of impact, probability of happening, and impact severity. You can do this analysis over time to see how is overall risk is how overall risk is impacting the project. And here's an example of this threat profile with visual overview in terms of a table, in terms of how much of a threat is being impacting the project over time. That's one way to visualize threats on the project. Opportunities. So opportunities are events or a condition that when occurring, it has a positive impact on one or more project objectives. And an example of opportunity would be when a subcontractor finishing work early, resulting in lower costs and schedule savings. There are several strategies to deal with opportunities. An exploit would be a response strategy whereby the project team will act to ensure that opportunity occurs. Essentially, that means the team would be actively aware of specific opportunity and work towards making it happen and taking advantage of the outcomes of this particular opportunity. Escalation, similar to threat management, will be used whenever opportunity is outside of the scope of the project, or the proposed response would exceed the project manager's authority. It will still have an impact on the project, but would have to be dealt with higher authority. Share. Opportunity sharing involves allocating ownership of an opportunity to a third party, similar to in terms of threat management, to transfer. And is essentially transfer the opportunity, share it with the third party who would be most appropriate to capture the benefit of that particular opportunity. Opportunity enhancement basically allows the project team to increase the probability of occurrence or an impact of opportunity. And early enhancement action is often more effective than trying to improve opportunity after it has occurred. So it's somewhat similar to exploit. However, it's focusing on increasing the benefits of the opportunity. And acceptance, similar as with threats, basically acknowledges existence of an opportunity, but no active response is planned. Once the set of risk responses has been developed, it should be reviewed to see whether the planned responses, both for threats and for opportunities, have added any secondary risks. This review should be done regularly. So risk identification. Risk identification is it's a process of identifying risks in advance once you have set your project goals or a goal. And identifying risks should be done early in the project and shouldn't be done in the middle or during the project, as it might be too late. However, the regular risks analysis and risks review to identify potential new risks should be done regularly on a project. So initial risk identification should be done as early as possible before the project starts execution. However, continuous risk review should be done throughout the project. So there are two ways to identify risks. First, you identify root causes and analyze the impact that these risks might have. Or you can identify the essential functions that the project team or the company must perform to reach the goal of the project, and identifying how these functions can fail in reaching this particular goal. And the project team, as I mentioned, should proactively identify these risks. That will mean implementing a cadence in terms of risk review and risk identification. There is one method called decision tree diagram. Essentially, it's a visual way of representing how decisions are made when faced with multiple options. It allows you to assess the values of outcomes and possibilities of achieving them. So, first step is to identify decisions, and you prepare the diagram based on decisions, cost of each decision, and rewards of uncertain options which are available. Then you identify the probability of a risk occurring and assign this risk to a specific decision. Then you identify the monetary value of the risk based on how much it would cost if the risk would occur. And then you calculate expected monetary value of each decision path by multiplying probability and impact of each decision path. Influence diagram is used to represent a summary of information of a decision tree. So first you identify the decisions that are made to reach your objective. Then you consider the risks and performance factors that may have an influence on achieving your objective. Third, you recognize secondary factors that affect uncertainty associated with performance factors. Fourth, you identify second-order risk factors that can influence these secondary factors. And you continue to figure out what factors influence uncertainty until all key risks are identified. You might be familiar with this one. It's called SWOT Analysis, SWOT. And essentially you use this whenever planning a new project or developing a new process, and it translates as identification of strengths, weaknesses, threats, and opportunities associated with a particular event. And you basically break down the table into 4 positions. On the top left corner, you define strengths. On the top right, you define weaknesses. On the bottom left, you define opportunities. And on bottom right, you define the threats. And that helps you in having an overview of overall project. Another method is called Fishborn Diagram, also known as Ishikawa diagram. And basically a diagram to show cause and effect of the problem. And basically you define the problem and associate causes that lead towards this problem. If necessary, we'll spend a separate session on this, on these methodologies, these types of risk management and assessment with hands-on approach. Another method is called process maps. And basically, it's a visual diagram of all the major steps and relationships between them in the process. To use it, you need to identify the team that you need to map, or a process, or new process, or existing process. Then you bring together anybody who is involved in executing or developing the process, and brainstorm all the information related to this, including inputs and outputs of each step. Then all the steps that were identified are put in a sequential order, including branching out, and you draw the map that shows the current state of the process. Once you have this diagram drafted, you can use it to identify bottlenecks and identify flaws in your process. Risk analysis for the identified risks includes qualitative risk analysis and quantitative risk analysis. Qualitative risk analysis is a way to analyze risks based on likelihood of them occurring and the impact they might have on projects and businesses. And quantitative risk analysis basically analyzes the value of each outcome and evaluates the probability of achieving these objectives based on such risk outcomes. And there are a few risk management methods that you can help with the analysis of the risk management process. Risk probability and impact matrix basically allows you to use 2 dimensions, to add 2 dimensions to risk review. One is probability and another one is impact. Probability of risk can range between 0 and 100%. And between 0% meaning it will never occur, and 100% for the probability of event occurrence. And impact, basically you put an impact level of the threat as negative and opportunity as positive. So there are several ways to represent this. On the table view, you can see that you can put probability stretched between 10, 30, 50, 70, and 90%. And have review in terms of impact definitions. It can be tailored as you see needed. And threats with low probability and low impact can go to the color-coded schema. Basically, you can put color codes on low impact, low probability, and put them, let's say, green, put yellow on medium impact, medium probability, and put red on high impact, high probability. And for opportunities, it would be reversed, basically. Opportunity, low probability, low impact should be generally marked with green. However, in this example, it's marked as red. So you can use this way of representation. There is also type of a heat map representation where you put impact and probability the same way as you do with table view. However, you also draw heat maps in terms of desired values of these impact probability combinations. So generally you specify it just for threats and just for opportunities separately. Another way to represent risk probability, analyzing the identified risks is a Parity chart. And you might be familiar with this bar representation of values. It's called Parity chart. But in this example, you have to follow certain steps. First of all, you identify the categories to group the items, the risks. Then you use measurements, how to measure each group of the risks, such as frequency, cost, time, etc. In this example, it shows number of defects. Then you decide on a period of time that you want to cover within this Parity chart. Alternatively, like in this example, you can decide on number of observations of each type, of each grouping. Then you collect the data and summarize subtotal for each group of the identified risks. And that will show you essentially either number of occurrences within a certain period of time for each group, or it will allow you to see over time how many in each mentioned period of time, how many of each grouped risks occur per period of time. Next approach is called fault tree analysis. It's a branching diagram. Essentially, you put an event, you identify failure or fault, which is called event here, to analyze, and you list all the immediate or direct causes for the fault, and you examine each step until all the root causes are analyzed. And it can be more than one level for each direct cause for the event that you're analyzing. So once you have all the potential causes for the event occurrence, you can do the evaluation of this particular current event in terms of risks and how to deal with it. So going back to the risk review, it is vital to define a cadence of a review and to collect feedback from stakeholders in terms of project risk management, having observations of new and existing risks, and defining risk responses in terms of applicability to each part of each objective within the project, as well as identifying responsible parties within the project team or within stakeholders. Next step would be management and contingency reserve. Essentially, that means whenever you plan time and budget for your project, you need to account a certain amount of extra time and extra budget for risk handling. It's not absolute must to have such reserves. However, having contingency reserve to address identified or unidentified risks should be available in case these risks happen. And the management reserve is basically contingency reserve is set for identified risks, and management reserve is set for unknown events, including unplanned activities that still cover project objectives and consider it in scope of the project work. Planning to avoid future risks. There are several methods and ways to mitigate the risks and to find solutions and to control them. So let's look into these potential ways of dealing. These are all actively used techniques. Futures wheel diagram. Essentially, it's a tool that can help you identify direct and indirect results of a certain trend, event, or decision. And you do it in steps. First, you identify the change. It can be both either a problem or potential risk or both. But you need to build the list of such changes to apply this diagram approach. Then you identify and brainstorm possible consequences of this change. And there can be multiple orders of that consequence resulting from this change. You use expert opinions and you involve stakeholders and project team members to do brainstorming around this diagram analysis. And you expand diagram to as many layers as needed, trying to find as granular outcome as possible. Once this wheel is complete, you can overview of a direct and indirect consequences of the change that you want to implement and list all the negative consequences, and then you can plan and identify possible actions to control these negative consequences. On process decision program chart, basically a mapping way for any particular event. It helps you look into what might go wrong in the plan under development and to usually apply it during planning stage of the project. You can use this chart to alter the plan in order to prevent a problem from occurring, or prepare a contingency plan to mitigate the risk. So first you create a tree diagram of the plan, including objectives, main activities, and tasks that should be completed under each activity. And then you take the tasks and brainstorm what could go wrong with each particular task. If the consequences of the problems identified earlier are insignificant, leave them out. Add only the significant problems related to each task and put it below tasks list on the diagram. Then you identify countermeasures for each problem identified and add them below each problem applicable to each identified problem. And then on the last step, you consider whether it's practical to apply each countermeasure in terms of time, resources, cost, etc. And you can mark practical and impractical solutions as such. Then you can do analysis of solutions that can be approached and solutions that are too impractical to approach. Next way to deal with future risks and planning to avoid those future risks is a risk-reward analysis. It's a tool that helps you evaluate the risk and reward profile of the options. First of all, it looks like a four area square diagram, and you put down all the options and possible risks related to them. Then you plot the risks and rewards in the chart. And some options might have positive risk-reward profile. It will take time to see whether you should spend time on mitigating risks for the options. Then you compare each option against each other to identify the best option for the project. So basically you spread out all the risks and their rewards into several areas and focus on, first of all, low risk, high reward, and make sure to work towards executing low risk, high reward opportunities, and looking into mitigation of high effort, low reward opportunities in order to avoid project risks. And the rest are analyzed from the perspective of benefits for the project. Essentially, it's a visual aid in terms of risk planning. And one of the main artifacts that are produced with the project is a risk register. And here's an example that basically helps you in grouping these risks. Doesn't have to look exactly the same way, but these are one of the most common properties of each risk identified. So you keep track of risk ID. For the ease of reference, you put risk description or title for the risk. Then you identify risk impact towards the project goals. Can be typed as words like high, medium, low, or it can be with assigned values. Risk status as of moment of the review. Essentially, some risks might be already resolved. Some of them might be just ignored. But you can use any status you want for the ease of analysis. Each risk needs to have planned resolution assigned. So you can have either just general statement like mitigation, transfer, acceptance, or you can have more explicit details around dealing with each particular risk. Initial time of logging the particular risk identified, and this is done during risk identification activity. And also, it's a good idea to keep track of who reported this risk or who is responsible of dealing with this risk. It's a good idea just to keep track of that for the ease of management of the project. Okay, that's about it for the introductory information around project management, project risk management, and hopefully it was useful for you. We'll see you on other sessions.